Warning before the narration begins. This story contains intense scenes and disturbing details. Some moments may not be suitable for younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. If you stir new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling military story. The ocean stretched endlessly below, a cold silver-blue mirror glinting under the late afternoon sun. Inside the belly of a U.S. Air Force C-130 Hercules, the hum of the engines was a steady background noise, the kind soldiers learned to live with, even sleep through. The aircraft carried a crew of 7 seasoned, disciplined, but weary from long missions across the Pacific. Captain Daniel Yates, a man with a stone-set jaw and a reputation for calm under pressure, sat at the controls. His co-pilot, Ortiz, leaned back in his seat, eyes half shut, rhythmically tapping a pencil against his knee. The other men shifted in their webbed seats, trying to get comfortable, some staring blankly at the metal ceiling above, others fiddling with personal trinkets tucked into their gear. It was supposed to be a routine supply flight, the kind you forget the moment it's over. But as anyone who's lived long enough knows, the things you never expect are the ones that mark you forever. The first sign came quietly. "Captain, the compass," Ortiz muttered, straightening in his chair. Yates glanced at the instrument panel. The needle twitched once, then spun wildly in a full circle before freezing, pointing not north, not anywhere it should have, but locked in a strange direction. He frowned, tapping the glass. Nothing. He flicked switches, trying to reset. The needle spun again and then froze in the exact same impossible position. Ortiz's voice had lost its usual lazy tone. "That Sep's not right." Yates exhaled sharply through his nose, switched to magnetic backup. But the backup was no better. The compass twitched like it was fighting something unseen. The second sign followed fast. The radio. "Tower. This is Echo 49, confirm coordinates." "Over." Yates leaned into the headset. Static crackled back. He tried again, flipping frequencies. More static. Then, just for a split second, a voice cut through, broken, garbled, and gone. "Dead air?" Ortiz asked. "Dead air doesn't whisper at you," Yates muttered. His knuckles whitened around the controls. The men in the cargo hold noticed now too. One of them, Sergeant Blake, shouted over the engine hum. "What Sep's going on up there?" "Interference." Yates called back, "Stay strapped in." But he knew it wasn't interference. He had flown these waters a dozen times. Something was wrong. Then came the third sign. The sky. One moment, it was wide and blue, stretched clear across the horizon. The next, without warning, a wall of fog and storm rolled in, thick, unnatural, and suffocating. It wasn't like weather moving in. It was like slamming into a barrier. The Hercules shuddered violently as turbulence gripped it. The men in the back grabbed their harnesses, eyes wide. The plane lurched downward, then upward, as if unseen hands were shaking it like a toy. Ortiz cursed under his breath. This isn't just turbulence. Lightning forked through the clouds, but it wasn't normal lightning. The flashes were greenish, like the sky itself was sick. In those brief bursts of light, the crew swore they saw shapes in the fog. Tall, wrong, almost human, but twisted. "Tell me you saw that," one of the soldiers muttered, his voice trembling. Eyes forward, Blake snapped, though his own hands shook. The turbulence suddenly stopped. The plane leveled out, eerily smooth, as if nothing had happened. But the silence was worse than the shaking. Ortiz leaned forward, staring through the cockpit glass. His voice dropped low. "Captain, where the hell are we?" The fog peeled back like curtains opening on a stage. Jagged cliffs cut into black waves. Thick jungle carpeted its interior. Strange shapes of stone jutted upward like ruins, half swallowed by trees, and on one stretch of flat land, half hidden by vines, lay something impossible, a runway. But the maps showed nothing. The radar had shown nothing. This island wasn't supposed to exist. Yates' stomach turned cold. He knew every chart, every island chain in these waters. There was nothing here. The decision was made for them. A red light blared on the instrument panel. The engines sputtered, coughing as though choked by invisible hands. Power bled fast. Altitude dropped. "We sit losing thrust," Ortiz shouted. Yates wrestled with the controls. "Brace. Brace for impact." In the cargo hold, the men clutched at their harnesses, their hearts hammering in their ears. Someone began to pray under their breath. The island rushed closer. The jungle loomed, swallowing the horizon. The C-130's tail clipped the edge of the jungle canopy. Metal screeched, sparks flew. The plane bucked, slammed downward, and skidded through the trees. Branches tore at the fuselage. The world became fire, smoke, and the sound of screaming steel. Finally, with a shuddering crash, the Hercules tore open a clearing and came to rest in a shower of dirt and broken wood. Silence followed. A silence so deep it roared in their ears. The surviving soldiers coughed, groaned, dragged themselves from twisted metal. Smoke rose in oily plumes. The wreckage burned behind them. And then, somewhere in the jungle, something answered. Not human, not animal, a sound too deep, too guttural, too hungry. The men froze, staring into the wall of trees. They hadn't just crashed. They had been brought here. The crash had left them rattled, their nerves frayed like torn wires, but nothing could prepare them for what the island held once the sun dipped behind the jagged tree line. The soldiers had managed to drag themselves to the shore after the wreck. The aircraft's fuselage still smoked, glowing faintly in the dusk like the dying ember of a fire. They had no time to mourn the men who hadn't made it. There were too many immediate problems. The jungle pressed in thick and dark, and the salt air carried a silence that felt unnatural. They gathered in a huddle, their uniforms torn, faces smeared with soot and blood. Sergeant Hale, the oldest among them, tried to take control. His voice was steady but low, a whisper that carried no confidence. "Stay together. We still light no fire tonight. Not until we know what sibs out here." The others nodded, but fear ran through their eyes like quicksilver. They were trained soldiers, but training didn't prepare you for the unknown. As night fell, the island transformed. What had seemed like tangled trees and harmless undergrowth during the day now twisted into black silhouettes. Every leaf rustled with menace. The wind didn't blow steady. It came in bursts, carrying with it sounds that made no sense. Low growls, clicking noises, and the occasional deep, resonant thud like something massive was moving in the dark. Private Keenan was the first to speak the thought on all their minds. "This place, it feels wrong, like it doesn't want us here." Nobody answered, but every man silently agreed. They sat in the sand, weapons clutched close. Some kept their eyes on the jungle, others stared out at the endless black ocean. Both directions felt dangerous. The water seemed to whisper, carrying faint echoes of voices, or maybe just the sea playing tricks on their ears. Hours dragged by. Exhaustion gnawed at them, but nobody dared to sleep. Every few minutes, one of them would flinch at a sound, a branch snapping, a distant cry that sounded human but couldn't possibly be. Then it came, a scream. Not far off, carried from deep in the jungle, it was high, shrill, and filled with such pain that the men froze. It wasn't an animal, at least not any animal they knew. It sounded human. Someone suffering. Private Walsh muttered, "God, that's one of ours." He rose, instinct pulling him toward the sound. Sergeant Hale snapped, "Sit down." His voice cracked with a force he didn't have to fake. "Nobody goes into those trees. That wasn't one of us." But Walsh couldn't shake it. The scream had been too human, too desperate. He gripped his rifle tight and paced near the edge of the tree line. Every shadow between the branches seemed to shift, beckoning him. The group fell into silence again, ears straining for the next sound. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then the jungle answered, not with another scream, but with laughter. It was faint, distorted, as though carried on the wind from far away, yet close enough to crawl beneath their skin. It wasn't joyous laughter. It was broken, mocking, the sound of someone or something playing with them. Fear cracked through the group. Private Keenan started whispering prayers under his breath. Even Sergeant Hale's face drained pale. Then, without warning, the jungle went dead silent. No wind, no leaves rustling, no insects. The island seemed to hold its breath. The men pressed together tighter, rifles raised. Even the smallest movement felt loud. And then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crushing the undergrowth. Too slow to be a fleeing animal, too heavy to be a man. They came closer, stopping just short of the tree line. But when the soldiers aimed their rifles, they saw nothing. Just the same wall of shadow and leaves. For long minutes, the footsteps circled them, always in the dark, never showing a shape. One soldier swore he saw a figure move between the trees, tall, hunched, with glowing eyes that blinked out the second he blinked himself. Finally, just as quickly as it had started, the sounds faded. The jungle came alive again with crickets and the sigh of wind. But nobody slept that night. They sat there on the sand, eyes wide, hands trembling on their rifles, waiting for whatever it was to come back. The first night had taught them one thing. The island wasn't just empty wilderness, something was alive in those trees. And it knew they were there, and it was waiting. Morning came, but it did little to calm the men's nerves. The sun rose pale and cold, its light spilling across the ocean and into the jungle. But instead of comfort, it revealed more unease. The soldiers could see now what they hadn't in the dark. The forest was thick, suffocating, and alive with shadows that never seemed to sit still. Their throats were dry, their stomachs twisted with hunger. Some hadn't eaten since before the crash. The salty air only made their thirst worse. Survival meant they needed food, water, and shelter. Sergeant Hale stood before them, his face lined with exhaustion, but his voice steady. "We can sit here. Supplies once fall from the sky. If we stay by the wreck, we starve. We move inland, 2 hours in, then back. Nobody wanders off. Got it?" The men nodded, though uneasily. None of them wanted to step under the canopy after what they'd heard during the night. But the alternative, dying of thirst on the beach, was worse. They slung their rifles over their shoulders and formed up, stepping into the jungle. The instant they crossed the tree line, it was like stepping into another world. The air grew heavier, wet, and suffocating. Vines dangled like ropes, moss crawled over every surface, and the light dimmed until it felt like twilight, even though the sun was high. The silence was the worst. Their boots crunched on damp soil, but aside from that, the forest seemed to muffle sounds, swallowing everything. Private Walsh whispered, "It sits like the trees are listening." Nobody laughed. Not this time. They pushed on, cutting through brush and hacking vines. The deeper they went, the more they noticed things that didn't belong. Carvings in tree bark, symbols scratched into stone, a pile of rocks stacked carefully in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Private Keenan muttered, "Locals?" But Sergeant Hale shook his head. "This islandette's uninhabited. At least it's supposed to be." The words "supposed to" lingered heavy. After nearly an hour, they stumbled upon what looked like a clearing. In the center was a pool of water. Dark and still, surrounded by ferns, relief washed over them. Water meant life. Private Walsh dropped to his knees and leaned in, but Sergeant Hale yanked him back. "Not yet. Look first." The men peered into the pool. It reflected the jungle canopy above, but something felt wrong. Too dark, too deep. No insects hovered over it, no birds swooped near. The jungle seemed to avoid it. Then Private Keenan gasped, "There, did you see that?" Something had moved beneath the surface. Not fish. Bigger, a pale, shapeless form sliding silently through the black water. They stepped back in unison, rifles raised. The pool rippled once, then stilled, leaving only their own terrified faces staring back at them. "We still find another source," Hale ordered, his voice taut. "We stir not drinking that." They circled the clearing, pressing deeper. The forest thickened, branches clawing at their uniforms. Hours passed, hunger gnawed. The men grew quieter, each lost in his own thoughts. Then they found it. An old camp, or what was left of one, rusted metal tins, shreds of canvas, a broken rifle half buried in moss. At first, they thought it might be from another downed crew. But then they noticed the bones, piles of them scattered around the site, some small, others larger, Skulls cracked open, ribs gnawed. The men froze, their stomachs lurching. Private Walsh whispered, "God, they ate each other." But Sergeant Hale shook his head grimly. "No, look closer." The bones weren't just broken, they were crushed, snapped clean in ways no human teeth could manage. The realization hit them all at once. Something had fed here, something that had no trouble tearing men apart like brittle sticks. A sudden rustle shot through the trees. The men spun, rifles up. The jungle had gone still again, just like it had last night. The air was heavy with the weight of being watched. Then came the smell. Rot, thick, sour, stomach churning, like a carcass left too long in the sun. It drifted through the clearing, growing stronger. Private Keenan gagged, covering his mouth. "What is that?" Sergeant Hale didn't answer. His eyes darted across the trees, searching. The sound followed. Low, guttural, almost like a growl, but too deep, too resonant, the kind of sound that shook your ribs inside your chest. Something was out there, watching, waiting. "Back to the beach," Hale ordered, his voice low but sharp. The men didn't argue. They backed out of the clearing, rifles trembling in their hands. Every step felt heavier, slower, like the forest itself was trying to hold them back. Behind them, the growl rumbled again, followed by the crack of branches under something massive. The soldiers quickened their pace, almost running now, pushing through vines and roots. The light grew brighter. The ocean just ahead. Relief surged, and then came the scream. It tore through the forest behind them, shrill and human, just like the night before, except this time, it sounded closer. Much closer. They broke from the tree line, stumbling back onto the sand, chests heaving. The wrecks still smoked in the distance, but the open air felt like salvation. Yet even as they collapsed, gasping for breath, they knew the truth. The island wasn't set empty. Something lived there, something that had been feeding long before their plane ever fell from the sky. And now it knew they were here. That night, the men tried to keep the fire alive. Flames crackled, but their light barely pushed back the suffocating blackness that pressed in around them. Every sound, the hiss of waves, the snap of driftwood, made the soldiers flinch. They spoke little, each man staring into the fire as though it were the only thing tethering him to sanity. The memory of the growl in the jungle and those bones hung over them like a curse. Sergeant Hale sat apart, cleaning his rifle, though his eyes kept darting to the tree line. He knew something was out there. He felt it. Private Walsh, jittery and pale, finally broke the silence. "Sergeant," it screamed, like a man. "What if there are others here? Survivors? Prisoners?" Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to say what they were really thinking, that no human could make a sound like that. As the hours dragged, the men drifted into uneasy rest. The fire dimmed, shadows thickening around them. One by one, heads slumped, rifles slid from laps. Except for Private Keenan, he couldn't sleep. The smell was back, that sickly rot, faint but undeniable, drifting on the breeze. His stomach churned as he glanced at the jungle. Then movement, just beyond the trees. A shadow sliding between the trunks, too tall, too broad to be a man. Keenan's heart hammered. He reached for Hale, but something in him froze. His mouth wouldn't open, his body wouldn't move. He just stared. The shadow leaned closer. For an instant, in the flicker of the dying fire, Keenan saw something pale, a face, but wrong. Too long, too distorted. Black pits where eyes should be. Then it was gone. He blinked, shaking, telling himself he imagined it. But the smell, thicker now, proved otherwise. The fire sputtered lower. Keenan stood, trembling. "Just more wood," he whispered to himself. His voice shook. "Just more wood." He crept toward the tree line, glancing back at the others. None stirred. Hale's head was bowed, eyes shut. The rest snored quietly, dead to the world. Keenan stepped into the shadows, gathering sticks. The jungle loomed like a wall of teeth. He swallowed hard and crouched, grabbing a thick branch. That sips when he heard it, breathing. Slow, deep, not his own. It came from right behind him. Keenan froze, every nerve screaming. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glimpse, and then the darkness moved. Something massive lunged, impossibly fast. A pale arm, if it could even be called that, snapped out of the shadows, wrapping around Keenan's chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He was yanked into the trees, swallowed whole by the blackness. The forest went silent again. Back at the camp, the fire crackled. The others shifted in their sleep. No one noticed. No one heard. When dawn broke, the men stirred groggily. Hial rubbed his eyes, scanning the camp. His stomach dropped. Keenan. No answer. He called louder. Keenan, report. The others woke, confused. Walsh looked around, panic flashing across his face. Where is he? Where the hell is he? The men scrambled, searching the beach, the tree line, the wreckage. Nothing. No footprints, no struggle. It was as if Keenan had simply vanished into thin air. Walsh's voice cracked. He wouldn't sit, just leave. He wouldn't sit. Hale's jaw tightened. He remembered the smell. He remembered the eyes he thought he saw in the dark. His gut twisted. Something had taken him. But he couldn't say it aloud. Not yet. The men were already cracking. Fear was a disease, and it spread fast. Instead, he barked orders. Form up. We sweep the tree line. Stay tight. Nobody breaks formation. Move. They entered the jungle in a wedge, rifles raised, eyes darting. Every rustle, every shadow made their hearts skip. Then they found it. A single boot, half buried in the dirt. Keenan's boot. The leather torn open, as though ripped apart by claws. Walsh picked it up with shaking hands, his face pale. God. Oh God. The silence that followed was worse than screams. Each man knew, deep down, what had happened. But Sergeant Hale forced his voice to remain steady. We keep moving. Eyes sharp. If it got him, it can get any of us. They pushed deeper, the jungle pressing tighter. The smell of rot grew stronger. And then they saw the marks. Claw gouges in tree bark, deep, ragged, higher than a man could reach. The men stopped cold. Walsh whispered, that sip's not possible. But Hale didn't reply. His eyes narrowed, his grip on his rifle tightening. Whatever had taken Keenan wasn't sipped human, and it was hunting them. The jungle had never been silent like this before. Usually, the air was alive with the hum of insects, the caw of distant birds, and the rustle of leaves. But now, as the soldiers pressed deeper, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Every step was a betrayal. Boots crunched against the undergrowth, echoing like gunfire. Sweat dripped down their faces, stinging their eyes. Even the hardened veterans felt it, that primal weight of being watched. Sergeant Hale raised his fist. The squad froze. Ahead, the path narrowed between thick banyan roots twisted like skeletal arms. The air smelled thicker, heavier. The stench of rot clung to them, sour and choking. Stay sharp, Hale whispered, his voice barely audible. Weapons ready. Private Walsh's hands shook as he clutched his rifle. His eyes darted everywhere, tree branches above, shadows between trunks, the dark soil at his feet. His lips moved soundlessly, muttering a prayer. Then it came. A branch cracked, low, heavy. Not a bird, not the wind. Something moving through the underbrush. The men swung their rifles toward the sound. Hearts pounded. Leaves shivered. A shadow darted between the trees. Just a glimpse, massive, hunched, pale. Hale barked, hold fire. His instincts screamed at him. If they fired blind, they'd waste ammunition, reveal their position. But the men couldn't hold steady. Every muscle screamed to shoot. Then another sound. A growl, deep, guttural, vibrating through the earth itself. It wasn't the roar of a lion, nor the howl of any predator they'd ever known. It was something older, something wrong. Walsh whimpered, "It sits here." The jungle exploded. A massive shape burst from the trees, so fast the eye could barely register it. A blur of pale skin, elongated limbs, and eyes like black hollows. The men opened fire. Gunshots ripped through the forest, deafening, bullets shredded leaves, bark, and air. The stench grew overpowering, a wave of decay that turned their stomachs. Through the muzzle flashes, they saw it. Tall, too tall, 8 maybe 9 feet. Its body was gaunt but powerful, skin stretched thin over bone and muscle. Its mouth, if it could be called that, split unnaturally wide, filled with jagged, uneven teeth. The thing didn't fall, didn't bleed. Bullets tore into it, but it kept coming, weaving through the hail of fire like smoke. Private Daniels screamed as it lunged. A clawed hand swept out, striking him across the chest. The sound of tearing flesh split the night. He was lifted from his feet, flung into the trees like a rag doll. The squad broke formation. Panic took over. Some fired wildly. Others stumbled back, tripping over roots, desperate to escape. "Hold the line," Hale roared, but his voice was drowned out by gunfire and screams. The creature charged, faster than thought. It was among them now. One moment it was 10 feet away, the next it was inside their circle, its claws slashing, its jaws snapping. Private Lewis fired point blank into its chest. The creature staggered, then roared, a sound that shattered their eardrums. Lewis's triumph lasted less than a second before the beast's hand wrapped around his head. With horrifying ease it twisted. A crack echoed. Lewis dropped, lifeless. Walsh fell to his knees, firing upward, tears streaming down his face. The beast loomed over him, its shadow swallowing him whole. And then something strange. It stopped. The creature bent low, its face inches from Walsh's. Black pits stared into his eyes. Walsh froze, paralyzed. The beast inhaled deeply, as though smelling him, tasting his fear. Then, just as suddenly, it turned and bounded into the trees, vanishing into the jungle, as if the night itself had swallowed it. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the labored breathing of the survivors remained. Hale stood rigid, his rifle still raised, finger twitching on the trigger. Sweat dripped down his forehead, mixing with grime and gunpowder. The jungle slowly came alive again, distant insects, rustling leaves, but it no longer sounded natural. Every noise now felt like mockery, like the forest was laughing at them. Private Daniels groaned from the darkness where he had been thrown. The squad rushed to him, but the sight made their stomachs drop. His chest was shredded, ribs exposed, his breathing rattled, wet and shallow. "God, help me," Daniels gasped. Hale knelt beside him, pressing bandages to the wounds. But deep down, he knew there was no saving him. Daniels coughed blood, his eyes wide with terror. It wasn't human, his body went still. The squad fell silent. Walsh finally spoke, his voice broken. "We can fight that. We can stay here." Hale clenched his jaw. His hands shook, though he tried to hide it. He had faced battle, ambushes, artillery, but nothing like this. He glanced toward the jungle where the creature had vanished. The smell still lingered, faint but undeniable. It had spared Walsh, not out of mercy, not out of weakness. No, it had chosen to, and that was worse. Because it meant the beast wasn't just hunting them. It was playing with them. The jungle was never silent again. Every rustle, every sway of the branches, every whisper of wind carried the weight of unseen eyes. The men had always known the dangers of war, bullets, bombs, ambushes. But this was something older, something primal, and it was driving them to the edge of madness. The survivors trudged forward in a fractured silence, their faces pale, their eyes wide, their rifles clutched so tightly that their knuckles turned white. No one dared to speak, because speaking meant acknowledging the truth that they were being hunted. Sergeant Hale led from the front, but even his steps betrayed unease. He scanned the tree line constantly, his finger brushing the trigger guard. He was trying to hold them together, but fear had already sunk its claws deep into the squad. Behind him, Walsh muttered prayers under his breath, the same words repeated over and over like a mantra. His eyes twitched from shadow to shadow, as though expecting the beast to leap out at any second. Private Ortega Saz's hands shook so violently, he could barely reload his weapon. "It doesn't set die," he whispered finally. "It doesn't set bleed. Bullets don't set work." "What? What kind of thing is it?" "Shut it," snapped Corporal Fisher, though his voice cracked. "It sets just an animal. Everything dies if you hit it enough." But none of them believed that. The memory of Lewis's broken body, Daniel's shredded chest, and the monster's unholy scream still hung in the air. That scream, it wasn't just sound. It had sunk into them, rattling their bones, gnawing at their sanity. Even now, hours later, they swore they still heard it, faint and distant, threading through the trees like a haunting echo. As night fell, the jungle grew even darker. The canopy above blocked out the stars. Leaving them in a world of shifting shadows, they made camp reluctantly, forming a tight circle, rifles pointed outward, a fire crackling in the center. But the fire brought little comfort. The flames danced, casting grotesque shapes across the trees. Every flicker seemed to create a new figure, a new phantom lurking just beyond sight. Walsh finally snapped. "It's watching us right now. I can feel it, just standing out there waiting." His voice was shrill, his hands trembling. "Quiet," Hale ordered, but his own voice was hoarse. The men huddled closer to the fire, listening. Hours passed. The jungle was alive with noises, too alive. Branches cracked where no wind stirred. Stones shifted as though under heavy weight. Once, in the distance, came the faint sound of laughter, low, guttural, not human. They froze, staring into the darkness. Ortega Sit's lips quivered. "Did you hear that?" Nobody answered. They didn't set need to. The sound came again, closer. A long, drawn-out scraping, metal against stone, like claws dragging along rock. Fisher aimed his rifle, hands slick with sweat. "It sets circling us." Then, without warning, the fire sputtered. The flames hissed and shrank, as though smothered by some invisible force. Darkness rushed in, suffocating them. The men panicked. Rifles clicked, safety catches were flicked off, eyes darted wildly. "Stay calm," Hale barked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. From the darkness, two pinpricks of light appeared, eyes reflecting the dying fire, watching them. Walsh screamed and fired. The muzzle flash lit the clearing, revealing nothing, just trees, just shadows. But the eyes remained. The beast let out a low growl, a sound that shook the ground beneath them. Suddenly, something massive slammed into the perimeter. A blur of pale flesh. Ortega was yanked into the trees before anyone could react. His scream echoed, then cut off with a sickening snap. "Light it up," Hale roared. Gunfire erupted, strobing the jungle with flashes of orange and white. Bullets tore into the darkness, into shapes that weren't there. The beast darted between trees, faster than sight, its movements almost mocking. The men fired until their rifles clicked empty. Then came silence. No body, no blood, only Ortega's helmet lying on the ground, slick with something dark. Fisher cursed, his voice breaking. "It's Stitz not just hunting us, it's Stitz playing with us." They tried to regroup, but the night dragged on, torturing them. Some men dozed off in brief, haunted snatches of sleep, only to wake screaming, convinced the creature's face had hovered inches from theirs. By morning there were shadows of soldiers, hollow-eyed, paranoid. Every step forward was slower than the last, as though the jungle itself had grown endless. The beast followed them relentlessly. They never saw it directly, but the signs were everywhere, footprints too large to belong to any man. Trees clawed and scarred, carcasses of animals torn apart and left in their path like warnings. At times, they swore they heard whispering. Human voices, familiar ones. Fisher swore he heard his mother calling his name. Walsh said he heard Lewis, the man who'd been killed, crying for help. But when they chased the sounds, they found nothing. Only more trees, more silence, more fear. The soldiers were no longer just running from the beast. They were running from their own minds. By the time they stumbled into a ravine, their nerves were shattered. Their supplies were nearly gone. Ammunition dangerously low. Hale tried to rally them, but his words felt hollow even to himself. They weren't set soldiers anymore. They were prey, and the beast knew it. The jungle had chewed them down to bone and fear. Sergeant Hale stared at the ragged faces of the men who remained. They weren't soldiers anymore, at least not in the way the army had trained them to be. Their uniforms were shredded, their boots caked in mud and blood, their eyes hollowed out by nights of terror. They had started this mission as warriors. Now they were little more than survivors clinging to rifles like lifelines. But even in that broken state, Hale knew one thing: the beast wasn't going to stop until it killed every last one of them. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't going to let them leave this cursed jungle at all. "We make our stand here," Hale said finally, his voice low but steady. Fisher blinked, as though he hadn't heard right. "Here? In the open?" "Yes," Hale replied. "We keep running. It'll pick us off one by one. Yusep's seen it. Yusep felt it. It's faster, stronger, smarter than we are, but it bleeds." The men looked at him uncertainly. Did it really bleed? None of them could say for sure. Every bullet they'd fired seemed to disappear into the shadows, swallowed by the night, but Hale needed them to believe. Walsh clutched his rifle tighter. "What if it doesn't sit bleed, Sarge? What if," his voice cracked, "what if it sits not something that can be killed?" Hale locked eyes with him. "Then we shall find out the hard way, but I sep not dying with my back turned. Not out here." They set to work. The ravine gave them a narrow choke point. Trees on either side rose like black walls, and boulders provided what little cover they could scrape together. They rigged tripwires from spare gear, set sharpened sticks into the mud as makeshift punji traps, and built a small fire in the center, not for warmth, but for light. It wasn't set much, but it was something. As the sun dipped behind the canopy, they waited. The jungle fell into that uncanny silence again, the kind that pressed down on the lungs, heavy and suffocating. The only sounds were their own breaths, ragged, shallow, uneven. Fisher muttered under his breath, "This is suicide." Hale didn't answer. He couldn't afford to admit the same thought was gnawing at him. The first sign came as a ripple through the trees. Leaves trembled, a branch snapped, then silence again. The men raised their rifles, eyes darting wildly. Another sound. Behind them this time, a scrape of claws on stone. Walsh nearly fired, but Hale hissed, "Hold." The beast wanted panic, wanted them to shoot at shadows. A deep growl rolled through the ravine, vibrating the ground. The sound was so low, so unnatural, it felt like it came from the earth itself. Then came the eyes, two burning orbs, reflecting the firelight. "Now," Hale roared. The ravine lit up with gunfire. Muzzle flashes stuttered like lightning, the sound of rifles cracking into the night. Bullets tore into the brush where the eyes had been. A scream answered them, not human, not animal, something in between, a howl that seemed to split the air itself. "It sets hit," Fisher shouted. But then, impossibly, the beast charged. It came out of the darkness like a nightmare given flesh, towering pale with claws that gleamed like blades and a mouth full of jagged teeth. The men opened fire at point-blank range. Bullets ripped into its chest, its shoulders, its face, chunks of flesh tore free. But still it came, slamming into their barricade with a force that sent men sprawling. Walsh was the first to fall. The beast's claw tore him open, flinging him aside like a rag doll. His scream ended as quickly as it began. Fisher emptied his magazine into its head, screaming in rage and terror. The creature staggered, howled, then swiped. Fisher's neck snapped with a sickening crack, his body folding lifeless to the ground. Hale fired until his rifle clicked dry, then drew his sidearm. "Come on," he shouted, voice breaking. "Come on!" The beast lunged and Hale dove aside, rolling to his feet. He grabbed a flare from his pack, lit it, and rammed it into the creature's side. The jungle lit up in red fire as the beast shrieked, flailing wildly, its body igniting with sparks and embers. For the first time, it looked hurt. But hurt wasn't the same as dead. It staggered back, smoking, then turned its burning eyes on Hale. And for a brief, terrible moment, Hale realized the truth. The beast wasn't instead afraid, it was angry. It lunged again, claws outstretched. Hale raised his weapon, but before he could fire, something slammed into him. Ortega, the last surviving private, tackling him to the ground. The beast's claws raked where Hale had been standing, slicing through rock like it was paper. Ortega screamed, dragged down by the monster's weight. Hale scrambled up, firing desperately, but the creature tore into Ortega with savage fury. Blood sprayed across the rocks, his screams echoing into the night. Hale fired until the gun was empty. Then silence. The beast turned to him. Its face, if it could be called that, was a ruin of flesh and shadow, its mouth gaping wide enough to swallow a man whole. Hale Sip's hand shook as he raised his last flare. "Come on," he whispered, voice trembling. "Come finish it." The beast stepped closer, each footfall shaking the ground. And then, the jungle erupted in light. A flare arced through the sky, fired from somewhere above. The sudden brilliance lit the ravine, and in that moment, the beast recoiled, hissing, retreating into the shadows. Hale collapsed, gasping, his vision blurring. Reinforcements. Someone had seen the fire. Someone had come. But as the light faded and the jungle swallowed the beast again, Hale knew one thing with dreadful certainty. It wasn't set gone. It was waiting, and it would always be waiting.